Good afternoon. I am here. I'm the coroner of Berks County, and I am also here with Deborah Detweiler, who's my assistant chief deputy. And we are here to give a statement and a report on the decedents of the recent explosion at R.M. Palmer Candy Company, and to answer any questions that you have. We're here today to release the names of the victims in the recent tragedy at R.M. Palmer in West Reading. As for my office, our hearts go out to the people and families affected by this sorrowful event. We deal with tragic situations on a regular basis, but rarely have we witnessed devastation and heartbreak like this. But in the midst of this profound sadness, there are rays of light. We have been inspired and moved to admiration by the brave efforts of the emergency services personnel who have been here from the beginning of the response. We would be remiss if we didn't note the dedication to duty of those in West Reading who have dealt with this catastrophe on the ground, and I particularly want to note the amazing performance of the mayor of West Reading, Samantha Kaag, in pulling this team effort all together. Their compassion and professionalism has been beyond measure. Those innocent people who were cruelly taken from us remain loved and remembered, but in the clear chords of memory, we stand now in God's good time to mark their passing and to assure their family and friends that we will not forget them. Now, here is the pertinent information. As some of you may know, the first two decedents were recovered early on. That would be Amy S. Sando, 49, of Ephrata, Pennsylvania; Domingo Cruz, 60, of Reading, Pennsylvania. And then in the order in which they were recovered, Zorky D. Nunez, 30, of Reading, Pennsylvania; Susan H. Halvonic, 63, of Upper Providence Township, Pennsylvania; Michael D. Breedy, 62, of Marion Township, Pennsylvania; Diana M. Cedeno, 44, of Reading, Pennsylvania; and Judith Lopez Moran, 55, of Reading, Pennsylvania. Those were all of the people that were unaccounted for. Those are the people that were recovered, and those were the identities that we were able to establish, and their next of kin have been notified. As you may be aware, the primary function of our office is to establish the identity of decedents and to determine the cause and manner of death pursuant to a death investigation. And we met with the families at 4 o'clock on Sunday through the good offices of Reading Hospital. And of course, everybody was eager to know information, and they wanted to know information before we really had information to release. And I basically told them then, we can do it right or we can do it fast. And nobody wants to have a loved one reported as deceased before they're actually deceased. We need to get it right. So, just for your personal information, we make a personal visit on all next of kin. We do not notify anybody by telephone. That is not the way we do things. So we had to wait. One family was in Limerick, so we had to wait to do that. But that is the function of our office. Normally, a death scene is our scene by statute. When we come, the scene is ours, and we investigate the body and the context that it is found in generally. In this particular case, the scene was not ours. We had rescue personnel and specialists that were recovering the decedents from the rubble, because obviously there were voids there. We could end up with more of a tragedy with inexperienced personnel poking around where you don't know where you could cause another cave-in. I had received some pictures from Pima that indicated that there was actually a sizable void in the basement, and we just didn't need to risk inexperienced personnel. I had actual friends that were texting me saying, do they need volunteers down there? And I didn't want to be impolite, but I said, I think that's probably the last thing they need is a bunch of volunteers. So what would happen is they would recover someone, they would bring them out to a staging area for us, and then we would do our investigation there on the scene and then transport to the morgue. All of these decedents have been autopsied by this time. We waited to see if we could get all the autopsies done. I had a conversation with the district attorney the other day, and he wanted autopsies done on all of them, and I said, well, that's no problem. That's our thought, because obviously in this case, investigating cause and manner of death gets a little bit more complicated than it does under regular circumstances. But having said all of that, I'll take any questions that you have. And if I can't answer them, I'm sure Deb Detweiler is up to it too.
Grace with 69 News, what is the next step for your office?
The next step for our office is basically to release the bodies to the funeral home of their choice. Many family members at the hospital meeting wanted to see their loved ones, and first of all, the morgue is a restricted area, and it's frankly restricted even to us when we're not bringing a decedent in. And that's for a couple of reasons. Well, one reason in particular is if you're dealing with a criminal act, if you're dealing with a homicide victim, for example, you do not want some person just going in there and sprucing up the scene, so to speak, because they could be the person who caused the whole thing. The other thing is, and I will be perfectly frank without getting graphic, they were not viewable for the most part. The doctor determined that they had all suffered from blast injuries, which is distinguished from blunt force trauma. I mean, I'm sure many of the bodies suffered that in the ensuing collapse and that sort of thing, but he determined that all of them, at least preliminarily, died of blast injuries, which is a little different because that deals with more of an internal energy transfer than it does, rather than hitting somebody on the head with a club or something like that. But since the bodies were also found buried in rubble and that kind of thing, there were other insults at that to the body at that time. But he determined, at least preliminarily, that would be the cause of death. We have yet to determine a manner of death. That will remain pending further investigation, and there are investigatory agencies involved in that. And I think that you'll find that everybody's going to be pretty close-lipped about that. But we have nothing to share on that subject. We are not involved with that phase of it.
Mr. Fielding, Jeremy Jenkins with
Yes.
WGAL-TV. What is the timeline on getting that official cause of death? I know you're saying in the preliminary process that blast injuries and blunt force trauma is likely the cause, but how long does it take you to determine that officially?
I think that probably has to be answered in the course of time through the investigation. I mean, like I say, it's a preliminary cause of death. I don't really expect that to change very much. The manner of death is mostly what we're waiting on, and a manner of death, rather than the cause of death, a manner of death is a characterization of the injury suffered by the body in context. So, for example, if you find a body with a bullet hole in the head, we know what the cause of death was. It was a bullet hole to the head, a bullet to the head. But that could be a homicide or it could be a suicide, and it depends on developing further context. And that's what our office does when we have more of a control of a scene than we did this one. So the determining the manner of death is actually very dependent on other investigations ongoing on the site, and we would not really be directly involved in that.
I have a follow-up, if you don't mind. will you be able to move forward with the next steps that you mentioned a few moments ago? I know you said that would be releasing the bodies to the funeral home, but how can you determine a official cause if you release the bodies? So are those two?
No, we're happy with the results of Dr. Hoffman's autopsies of the, and he will be releasing autopsy reports, and that will go in as the cause of death. You know, there's usually a delay in getting an autopsy report. We'll get preliminary findings from the medical examiner, but it usually waits a month or two before we actually get the official autopsy report. So a lot of times we'll come out with a preliminary understanding, and then we'll get the final report, and that'll help us nail it down. But that usually takes about a month or so. The toxicology results come back sooner, but that wasn't really necessary in this case.
Nikki Demetri, CBS News Philadelphia. Can you just talk to us about, I know you said you didn't want to do this quickly, you wanted to put all of your time and effort into this. Just talk to us about the toll this has taken on your office. How many people have been working on this? How long were you working day and night? Just talk to us from a personal level. Just
Yeah,
the
well,
work you've been doing.
Well, we, initially, we did not know how big this was. I mean, after all, I think we've all seen the footage from the Fox camera that was on Candlewood Suites. I think that's gone nationwide. We weren't exactly certain what we were dealing with, so we basically issued an on-call to all available personnel, because we didn't know how quickly people would be brought out. Now, as it turned out, they were brought out sort of in a steady stream and congruent with the types of shifts that we had running and that sort of thing. We are a 24-hour-a-day operation. We do not shut down because, you know, people die at inconvenient times too. But not everybody is working all the time. But what we did was we issued a call to all the personnel, and I guess we probably had, 8 people respond. And to be honest, we weren't really pushed that much because of the progress. You know, let's face it, you're there to recover a body, but you're also not there to jeopardize someone else. I mean, one lady was taken out of there alive and frankly had, from what I understand, very minimal injuries, which was amazing considering. You don't want people going in there and just tromping around in the debris and causing further trouble. So I'm sure they were very slow and deliberate, and what that did was that helped us with our resources to make sure that we had the personnel able to go out and respond to these things. But we were busy there for a bit because there was no particular time frame on when we would get those calls. But I think, did we get a couple in the middle of the night, Deb? Yeah.
Yes.
But we had people on to cover that. You know, I don't want to be flippant about this, but you know, while we don't have explosions every day, we have deaths every day. So the people that are usually available were the people that were available for this. And, you know, it took the same toll on people that the job in general takes on people. People have said to me all along, why would you ever want a job like that? And I said, because it's a job that needs to be done. And these people are very dedicated. I know one woman who's been there 25 years, and she could not see herself doing anything else. Okay. You know, a lot of people are retired police officers and EMTs and folks like that, folks that have gotten used to seeing what we see on a daily basis. So everybody has their own ways of coming to terms with that sort of thing.
Elaine Fisher, Fox 29.
Mm-hmm.
Two-part question, kind of. In your career as a coroner, how difficult was this job identifying these victims? And also, what kind of means did you use to identify? Meaning, was it fingerprints, dental records, what kind of things?
All of the above. And that's usually the way it is. We use what I call all of our arrows in our quiver to do what has to be done here. Now, obviously, we're a little handicapped because we don't usually remove bodies from scenes. We usually investigate the body in scene. We'll take as many as 200 photos of the scene with the body in it, which we can then later analyze. We issue subpoenas for medical records and for dental records. And if necessary, we also schedule an autopsy. I've been very free with my people saying, look, if you need an autopsy, you don't need my permission. It's an additional tool. If you think, we don't have x-ray vision, and if you think you need an autopsy to determine cause and manner of death, then order the autopsy. I told them, I said that one of the possibilities in manner of death is undetermined. I said, look, I understand an undetermined, but I will not understand an undetermined if you don't use all your tools and then make it undetermined, So we use DNA. We have actually some cases pending, not particularly this one, but we have some old cases pending. When I took office, and I've only been in this office a year and a half, we had a closet full of remains, cremains, as well as actual, no, I wouldn't say bodies, but bones. And we are slowly but surely working our way through, because we somehow envisioned that these people, when they were born, did not envision writing out eternity in a closet in the coroner's office. So we are trying, in one person we had to send out for DNA. But we use all of that. Now in this case we didn't have to use DNA, but because each decedent posed its own challenge, you might say. One person was burnt beyond recognition. I will say I could not recognize it as I couldn't recognize the gender, for example. There were other people that were in various states, and you just had to use dental records. We went out to the families of folks that were missing and said, could you please send us dental records and medical records so we know who we have, because there's only one thing worse than identify a loved one, and that's to identify the wrong loved one. Like I said, we'd rather be right than be fast. So we use all of the above.
I just have two quick questions. When did you guys realize the scope of the situation? And then my second question, obviously you said you meet individually with these families. Can you just talk about the strength of these people that you've encountered and the strength of your office to be dealing with this?
Well, I will tell you that I think my office is second to none in being able to empathize with people that are in this set of circumstances. I find that my people are very sympathetic to the families when they go out to them. And I remember in our meeting with them at Reading Hospital, one young lady who was in her 20s basically refused to leave the hospital until she was able to view her loved one. And I said, well, no, we can't have that happen, because that's a restricted area, and to be perfectly honest, these remains were not viewable, and it would not have been a good thing. But they seem to be holding up relatively well. I mean, look, there's a temptation when you don't have much information to have a big, kumbaya session, where everybody sympathizes but nobody imparts much information. And I guess maybe sometimes I'm a little cut and dried for everybody, but the families were there to get information. They weren't there to be slobbered all over, and we're not much on that. We sympathize as much as we can, but we were there to give real information and a real estimation on when everybody could learn who was what in this whole thing. To tell you the truth, while I've only been coroner for a year and a half, I have been a resident of the area for 25 years, and I really can't think of anything comparable to this in this community. I mean, I left the office, and then I saw the smoke from where I was going. I was going to a place around Shillington, and I saw the smoke from the road, and I said, oh, this looks like a problem. And then I got a call from Deb. Deb was one of the first people to go out, and they had set up a command post down at the West Reading garages, and it was basically for the teams. So we had OSHA there, we had ATF there, because after all, you didn't know why the building blew up. In any investigatory situation, you try not to prejudge the case. I try to stress to my deputy coroners, because I was a lawyer for 30 years, and I try to stress to the deputies, we are not there to choose a theory and reinforce the theory. We are there to use evidence to eliminate theories. Sherlock Holmes once said that once you've eliminated all the impossible possibilities, that which remains, however improbable, is the answer. And I try to encourage people to proceed along those lines, to come up with their answer because they are forced to it by the evidence, not because they have picked a cherished theory and decided to run with it. So we had an entire team down there. Once Deb gave me that call, I left where I was, went the back way through Ken Pierce Boulevard, because coming up the Penn Street Bridge was a challenge. I think there was an orange cone on one day that was somewhat the worse for wear for me trying to get through there, because there was nobody there to take it down. But I came up the back way and went to the command post, and I was there for my office while they went out and did their job. But and then it became apparent that as night fell, it was going to be very difficult to do what they were doing. So, they had to come back the next day and the next day to make sure they had gotten all the rubble. But they had to bring in heavy equipment, which is always a problem, because, searching for deceased remains can be a delicate operation, and it's not always compatible with heavy equipment. But everybody seemed to do their job, and now the investigation is continuing with other agencies. Anything else? Well then, thank you very much for coming, and we felt that it was time to provide some closure and give you a kind of a final coda on the whole thing. So.